Welcome back to Premium Recaps. Today we'll be covering a 2020 drama and romance film called Good Will Hunting. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The movie starts at the MIT where Professor Gerald is teaching his class mathematics. He writes a very difficult mathematics problem and asks the students to solve. The problem is quite difficult and the person that solves it will have their names written at the MIT newspaper. He also says that the problem was only solved by top mathematicians. Will Hunting later looks at the math problem and goes home to try and solve it. He goes through the equation using his mirror at home. The next day, he goes to the class and writes the answer to the problem. He later goes out with his friend Chucky and when playing baseball, he notices a guy that used to bully him at school. He confronts the guy with his friends and they start a fight. Will hits the guy and beats him up. The friends try to stop him without success. A police officer comes and breaks the fight and Will gets arrested. Professor Gerald later discovers that the math problem has been solved. He is left confused and wonders which student actually solved the question. When he asks the students, no one responds and the entire class is left wondering. Professor Gerald then decides to write another math problem which he claims took him 2 years to solve. He puts out the challenge to try and identify whether the mysterious genius can solve another more difficult problem. After Will is released from jail, he goes to the school and looks at the problem. He goes to the blackboard and begins solving it. Professor Gerald then approaches him and sends him away telling him he should not be writing graffiti at the blackboard. After Will leaves, Professor Gerald identifies that the math problem has been correctly solved. He then realizes that Will is the mysterious genius. Will later goes to a Harvard bar with his friends. One of them makes fun of him being fired from his job as a janitor. Will's friend, Chucky, sees a couple of beautiful ladies and approaches them. He tries to impress them and lies that he was in the same class with them. Another man interrupts Chucky and belittles him by asking him which subject he is studying. Chucky replies that he studied history and the man knows that Chucky is lying. He asks him about history and Chucky remains silent. Will looks at the situation and confronts the man by putting down his thoughts. He cuts his sentence and mentions that he was plagiarizing by reciting a passage from a book. He then mentions that he paid thousands of dollars for the education which he got free in the school's library. The man gets embarrassed and leaves. Later on, a girl named Skylar approaches Will and gives him her phone number. She appears impressed by Will's intelligence and asks Will whether they could go out sometime. Meanwhile, Professor Gerald starts searching for the janitor that solved the complex mathematics problem. He asks around and gets the contact information of Will. He discovers that Will has a court case for assaulting a police officer. He had several other petty cases of assaults and theft. The judge insists that Will has been unruly for some time and he will be sent to prison and given a bail of $50,000. Professor Gerald then approaches Will with a proposition. He says that he talked to the judge who agreed to release Will on some conditions. First, Will has to accept to work on his math talent and he should also see a therapist. Will laughs at the idea of going to see a therapist. He has to agree about the 2 conditions or else he would serve jail time. Will visits different therapists and he struggles with most of them. He intimidates them, mocks them, and does not listen to anyone. Professor Gerald turns to his friend Sean McGuire, a therapist, for help. Sean teaches psychology at a community college and first refuses to help Will, saying that he did not have time for that. Professor Gerald insists that Will is a mathematics genius and that he would improve his situation by helping him. Sean then agrees to help Will. The first meeting is a difficult one for both Will and Sean as Will acts quite casually. The two discuss general topics like exercising and books. Will then looks around Sean's office and mocks everything he sees. He makes negative comments about the painting and then makes assumption about Sean's life and his wife. He notices that the weak point of Sean is about his wife and he brings up that topic several times. Sean gets quite irritated and he tells Will that there are boundaries. Gerald tells Sean that he understands if he does not want to see Will again. However, Sean is ready for the challenge and accepts to meet him again. Will then goes out on a date with Skylar. He finds out that she comes from a rich family and she studies at Harvard. The two have a good time and they share a kiss at the end of their first date. Will goes to Sean's office the next week. The two go out to a park and Sean states that he has thought a lot about what Will said about the painting. Sean says that Will is just a child and he did not know what he was talking about. He then criticizes Will by saying that he could talk about art and literature but could never talk about how going to the Sistine Chapel was like. Will could talk about women but he would never really know about how it was like to be in the presence of truly loving someone. He says that Will does not know love and loss because he has not experienced any of it. Sean then mentions about his wife dying of cancer. He then mocks Will by saying that he is just a scared kid but is trying to act tough. He tells Will that he can only understand him if he is willing to open up. The two part ways and the harsh reality begins to dawn on Will. He goes to a payphone and calls Skylar. She picks the phone and he does not say anything and he ends the call. Will later meets Sean for another therapy session. He remains quiet for the entire session and leaves after the session is over. At the 4th session, Will does not say any word. Will gets bored and decides to tell a joke. Sean takes it as an opportunity and asks if he has a girlfriend. Will then tells Sean about Skylar, a girl he has been in contact with after their first date. Sean then calls him an amateur, but Will insists that he knows what he is doing. Will says that she is different from all the other women she has been with. He says that he does not want to ruin what they have, because if he gets to know her better, then their relationship will become dull and boring. Sean criticizes Will by saying that with his approach, he will get to the end of his life without ever really knowing anyone. He tells Will not to think about Skylar being too good for him. Instead, he should ask if the two are happy together. Will gets carried away by the conversation and has to be reminded that the session is over. Will then visits Skylar and apologizes for being silent on her. He then asks her if they can go out again that evening. Skylar says that she is busy with her university work as she is working on a chemistry assignment. Will quickly solves the assignment on a napkin and says the two can go out together. Skylar asks about Will about his family and he states that he grew up in South Boston where he had 12 brothers and he mentions them by name. Skylar asks Will to restate their names to know whether he was lying, and Will restates the names easily since he has a good memory. He meets Sean for the next therapy session and Will asks whether he regretted meeting his wife after he experienced her death and felt a lot of pain. Sean then tells the story of how he met his wife. He saw her when he was buying a ticket for an iconic baseball game. Will gets excited thinking that Sean watched the game with her and he asks details about the game. Sean then states that he gave up watching the historical game at the stadium and went out for a date with the girl. Sean then answers Will's questions by stating that he never regretted meeting his wife or having her in his life, even though the two spent time together for only a few years. Will later meets with Chucky and the two talk about Skylar. Chucky then states that if Skylar knew about Chucky's living conditions, he would get dropped. Gerald and Sean meet and talk about Will's future of getting a job as a mathematician. Sean thinks that Will is not ready yet, but Professor Gerald insists on sending Will for a job interview. Will then sends Chucky for the job interview and he surprises everyone by appearing confused. Later, Skylar and Will meet and they get affectionate. Skylar talks about leaving to California and asks Will to go with her. Will's fears of abandonment resurface and he tells her about his difficult past. He talks about how he lied about having brothers and that he was an abused orphan. Skylar insists that she loves him, but Will says that he does not love her. Gerald later meets with Will and the two argue about Will's future. Gerald insists that Will should show some appreciation. Will helps Gerald with a math problem and burns it to show that he has more potential than him. Sean and Gerald then meet and the two talk about Will's future. Sean asks Will what he wants to do with his future and Will says that he wants to be a shepherd. Sean then asks him to leave, saying that he will not tolerate his foolishness. Will calls Skylar and the two have a tearful phone call before she leaves. She tells Will that she loves him, but Will does not reply. Will and Chucky meet at a construction site. When Chucky asks what Will wants to do with his life, he says that he only wants to live in Boston, be a neighbor to Chucky and work in construction. Chucky becomes honest with Will, saying that he feels bad for Will throwing away his life. Will later walks into Gerald arguing with Sean about their decisions and future. Professor Gerald walks out of the room. Sean shows Will the pictures of his body filled with bruises after he was beaten up by his foster father. Sean reveals that his father was an alcoholic and he beat him and his mother when he was a child. Sean then tells Will several times that whatever happened to him was not his fault. Will nods several times, gives himself to his emotion and hugs Sean. Will is ready to move and start a new life. Will turns 21 years and his friends show him a car they built as a gift. Chucky later goes to Will's place to find him and he finds out that Will had left. Chucky is happy that Will left his comfort zone. Sean reads the note that Will wrote saying that he left to see Skylar and is happy. Will walks to an unpredictable but better future. The end. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this.